Hello, welcome to Video Game Animation Study. Today we're continuing a mini-series looking at the 5 fundamentals of video game animation as proposed by Jonathan Cooper in his book Game Anim, Video Game Animation Explained. This episode is sponsored by Squarespace, the place to build your online presence. In the last episode, we covered the fundamental of feel and how important it is to ensure your character feels good to play, which in turn enhances one's enjoyment of that gaming experience, ensuring you avoid sluggish or unrealistic movement. Today, we're looking at the fundamental of fluidity. In a nutshell, fluidity is the practice of hiding any unsightly movements between separate animations that might take one out of the gameplay experience, by blending where one action ends with where the next action starts. This wasn't anything that was really approached in the early years of gaming because everything was based off sprites that were either playing or not playing. Shooting would snap you out of your idle pose straight into the shooting pose. If you were landing from a jump, your sprite would switch out the air pose for the landing pose that would just play upon contact with the ground. Some games might have had a bit of thought about the follow-up animation after that landing, but it would have been labour-intensive to consider each possibility for every transition between every action. Literally playing each action as it was needed was a simple, effective idea used by virtually every game in the first 20 years of the industry. And it remained this way even into early 3D games. I'm sure you'll remember seeing those little pops and stops in, say, Metal Gear Solid or Resident Evil. You could notice where one action stops and another begins. You can try this for yourself when you're next retro gaming. Try standing still and then begin to run, and then stand still again, and take a note of how it looks as you repeatedly do this. It could result in an unsightly pop, as Jonathan calls it. This is because one action begins to play, and if it is no longer needed, it simply resumes a resting pose with no transition in between. Games would begin and continue to blend these actions with an idle pose taking a few frames to transition into a run and back again. This gently feeds back into the previous fundamental of feel, in that you'll want to keep in check how a character moves for the sake of a prettier motion. Some games were pretty good with their actions, such as the first Tomb Raider game featuring Lara Croft. The jarring contrast between her actions wasn't as noticeable as some games, such as turning, landing from a high drop, and picking up items. But it comes at the detriment of feeling just a little sluggish, as you're not in control during some of these animations. Generally, Tomb Raider had really nice animations. Lara could aim independently of the way she was facing, either with one gun or 2 guns, which is pretty sophisticated for the time. But as games began using numerical values to construct 3D model poses, developers realised that they could manipulate these values in various ways that allowed crossfading between animations. This means they could decrease the value of one animation and increase the value of the next as they both played, creating a more seamless and therefore smoother action. This blending of animations could happen between any number of separate bespoke actions between the original 2 actions. If you have an idle and a run, perhaps you want a specific animation between those 2 when a character begins running in the opposite direction. Or say you want to slow down into a walk instead of stopping altogether. The more bespoke animations you have between actions, then the more fluid your general movement will seem when it comes to blending them. As Jonathan advises in the book, however, this can very well lead to an increasing amount of resource and budget. So try and figure out what's important to gameplay and feel first. In game animation, you've got 3 main types of motion that are all constantly flowing in and out of each other: loops, links, and linears. Loops are things like running and climbing, where an action is constant and must loop back on itself seamlessly. Links are those transitioning animations that blend 2 actions together, such as the start of a run or a landing from a jump. And linears are straightforward actions that play once from beginning to end, such as the swing of a sword. Keeping things looking neat, tidy and pretty between these three types of motion will help keep everything looking fluid, and ideally help immerse the player further, allowing greater enjoyment of the gaming experience. There are tricks to help smooth out actions even more in simple 2D games. For instance, overlapping action and follow-through action. Follow-through can be things like flowing fabric and hair. Madeleine's hair in Celeste looks like it's a mathematically worked out piece of animation, following her movements and coming to a stop a moment or two after she has. Zero had similar gorgeous hair in Mega Man X7 too. Overlapping action can be where different aspects of an animation move and arc at different rates to give the whole motion a less mechanical feel. For instance, when you stop running, you could gradually come to a halt, while the arms and any loose clothing or articles gradually come to a stop themselves at a slower pace, as what would likely happen in real life. Let's take a little look at the game Grow Home. You control a little robot called Bud, and you have to help these huge seeds grow into gargantuan plants that eventually reach into space. Now, much of your navigation comes from running, jumping and climbing, but the thing that likely sticks out during gameplay is just how ungainly Bud is when he moves. That's because he's pretty much purely controlled by maths and calculations, and this is called procedural animation. Interestingly, Bud is the result of a failed development tool looking into rapidly prototyping characters without the need for animators early on in a project. When you control Bud, all that's happening is your feet are taking the lead, and his body is always trying to make sure it finds the centre of gravity between his 2 feet, with his feet ensuring his body can stay up. So your feet are leading with your body catching up, which gives Bud this drunken motion. The programmers made sure that there was little follow-through when he lands from a jump to ensure players regained control as soon as possible. And because he's controlled by maths rather than any keyframed poses, all his movements flow into one another really smoothly. Grabbing things is dictated by if an object is movable or not. So when he grabs a rock or flower, it will follow Bud and where he goes. But if he grabs onto a vine or cliff, Bud will instead move and follow the motion of your input. So there's no real need for any additional animation. In the process of creating a way to remove the need for animators early on in the character development process, the team accidentally created their own little charming character with his own movement and own personality. I've covered procedural animation in a previous episode looking at Trico from The Last Guardian. This was a combination of procedural animation and traditional keyframes to blend the motion together. I'd recommend checking that video out. In modern games, 3D characters have many complex trees of movement information, and being able to smooth out transitions between these actions will ultimately give a prettier and arguably a more immersive experience. But at what cost? Red Dead Redemption 2 is incredibly detailed, but like the original Tomb Raider, can come as a detriment to the gameplay, with lengthy animations playing out before you can regain control. Some actions, such as pulling out a gun and shooting, still feel gamey and really responsive, but ultimately, how do you come away from the game feeling? Interesting little tidbit of information. Since GTA 4, Rockstar's games have an animation engine called Euphoria built into their own game's engine source code. Euphoria intricately simulates body physics and motions, and is often comparable with ragdoll physics, though it's a bit more complex, and kind of results in these situations where NPCs have a bit more life to reacting to things, and various other aspects. If you can smooth out all your actions while retaining how a character in a game feels to play, then you'll have done a decent job. But don't worry if you can't always implement smooth-looking transition animations, because the more animations you have, the more expensive the whole endeavour will become. And not everyone is Rockstar. So this is the fundamental of fluidity. Thanks again to Jonathan Cooper for his book Game Anime, which you can buy by clicking the link in the description. And thanks again to Squarespace for sponsoring this video. if you're an animator or creative mind and you're looking for one of them professional websites, then go on right ahead and click that link in my description just there. Having a Squarespace website is really neat. I mean, literally, you can organise everything easily, create your own look without much trouble, and you've got a whole load of tools that enable you to share things to other platforms, take donations, and see your analytical data and such. And it looks really professional, which really helps if you want to go for that job. So use that link in my description to start a free trial to check Squarespace out for yourself, and then when you're ready to launch, use my coupon code for 10% off your first purchase for a website or domain. Thanks to my patrons for helping me fund this episode. Let's give a shout out to a new patron, Ian Cockburn. Thanks, mate. Keep a lookout for my next video looking at readability. Love you, bye.